Well, thank you so much for coming in today. Good evening. I'm Mayor Erica A. Stewart, and today is a special meeting of the City Council, and I'm reporting that all members are pleasant too, but present, and would like to ask Councilmember Francis to lead the Pledge of Allegiance. Thank you. So since this is a special meeting, we will be accepting only public comment on the items listed on the agenda. And we will, as always, put a slip in with the city clerk, a speaker slip, if you'd like to speak. And we will call for public comment after the staff's presentation. If you have comments on the second part of our meeting, the closed session, we will call for a separate closed session public comment at that time. So first off, we have the study session on the Central Coast Community Energy proposed amendments to the joint exercise of powers agreement regarding board governance structure. And Councilmember Mark, did you want to wait till after the staff's presentation, or did you want to put in a few words now? I should have asked you that ahead of time,
no,
sorry.
Yeah, just right at the beginning.
Okay, I'm going to have Councilmember Marks add a few bits of input. She is our policy representative.
All right, thank you, Mayor Stewart. I'm sure I'll have more to say later, but I just wanted to start out by giving a general context of what it is we're talking about tonight, which is Central Coast Community Energy, which is a CCA, or community aggregate. And the first one in the state of California was started by Marin County. And this city joined 3CE, Central Coast Community Energy, in 2017. The other cities in our county joined in 2019. And at this point, the territory of 3CE consists of 5 counties: Santa Cruz, San Benito, and Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, and Monterey County, going all the way from Santa Barbara County up to Santa Cruz, with the exception of the city of Santa Barbara and the city of King City. Santa Barbara has got its own CCA. I'm not sure what the status is on King City, but they're not participating. And then Lompoc has its own utility. So what we're talking about is a 5-county organization that's ruled by the Joint Powers Agreement, or JPA, that has 35 jurisdictions in it. And our county has got 8, the 7 cities and the county now. So just recently, as you know, the county of San Luis Obispo and the city of Atascadero joined the 3CE. So at this point, as far as we know, we pretty much have reached a stage of what I'll call build out. We can't be the Central Coast Community Energy if we start going in toward Kern County, or if we start trying to go toward Ventura, LA, but there are other CCAs down there. So right now, we're pretty much at a moment of build out, which I think is something to celebrate. It's a great triumph to have actually reached this point in the history of the 3CE, but also in the history of CCAs in general. And when the legislation was passed in 2002, I was on the city council at that time. And this city, either not just people on city council or in governance, but the community has cared tremendously about forming the CCA and being part of it. And unfortunately, it took us till 2017 to do it. But there was a lot of work that went into creating an atmosphere of trust and to try something new, something as important as our electricity, our energy. And it's taken a lot to build up the credibility of 3CE and the faith in the provision of clean green energy as a way of fighting climate change, which in this county people care about tremendously. One of the main things that attracted people to one of the arguments, and there were many people making these arguments, was that there would be local control, that there would be participation in the governing boards on the part of the cities who participated. So at this point, we are facing a situation where, and it's moving very quickly, we're faced with a push to amend the JPA so as to significantly reduce the participation of the cities on the policy and the operations board. Our county, the cities in our county have had 3 seats on each board since 2019. 3 policy, so Paso Robles and Atascadero were 1 shared seat. San Luis Obispo and Morro Bay is another one. And then Arroyo Grande, Grover Beach, and Pismo is the 3rd. And now with the county, that means that we have 4. The proposal, which staff will get into in greater detail, would reduce this number to 2. 1 for all the cities in the county of San Luis Obispo, and 1 for the county itself. Or Don Ortiz Lake is the representative. So as staff will explain, the JPA has, Joint Powers Agreement has, in section 3.14 lays out an orderly and incremental process for adding seats as the new jurisdictions join 3CE. And this system provides, in my opinion, fair jurisdictional representation. It's worked well, in my opinion. And next year's new board, including the new city of Atascadero, is anticipating full participation in the decision-making process, as we all were promised when we joined CCA. So I'm going to stop right here, but I wanted to just give you some general, and the public, whoever is watching this, some general kind of context. So thank you for indulging me. Okay.
Great, thank you so much. And now we'll turn it over to Mr. Bob Hill.
Yes, good evening, Mayor and Council. I'm Bob Hill. It continues to be my pleasure to serve our community as Sustainability and Natural Resources Official. Joined here today with Chris Reed, our Sustainability Manager. I think only perhaps Council Member Peace will recall that Chris and I have been working together on this exact work since 2017, so we have a little bit of history on this stuff and working together. Really want to appreciate and thank Council for making a special meeting this evening to consider this important matter, and to City Manager McDonald and City Attorney Dietrich and our staff colleagues for being here. I also want to mention that we have Chief Executive Officer Rob Shaw from Central Coast Community Energy attending, Chief Communications Officer Catherine Stedman, and the Manager of Accounts who works here locally, Jenna Espinoza. So with that, we have a relatively brief slide deck today, really just to be as a jumping point to really facilitate your conversation. And I know that City Manager McDonald will have a few comments from the meeting that took place today as well with the other city managers. Our recommendation, as shown in the staff report, provide a consensus recommendation from the City Council to its appointed Policy Board Director regarding proposed amendments to the Joint Exercise of Powers Agreement for Central Coast Community related to the number and method of apportionment of seating board directors to its policy and operations boards. Thank you, Councilmember Marks, for the history and the context. Again, Central Coast Community Energy has a policy board and operations board that's governed and specified in the Joint Exercise of Powers Agreement. There were originally 11 members that were described in the JPA. There were 17 represented at the time of launch, currently 35 members. So that means that there are 19 board members on both the policy board and the operations board. The Policy Board meets 4 times per year, and the Operations Board meets 8 times per year. And then there's the special meeting, including the one coming up in September, that will take place in Aptos. We received the agenda for the August 14, 2024 Operations Board meeting, and just want to briefly go over what that was about. At high level, the staff report for that item number 12 from that meeting, describes the ad hoc subcommittee of the Operations Board had been convened to evaluate how the organization governed by a policy board and the original structure as outlined in the JPA, 2 boards capped at 11 members. The current structure, 2 boards with 11 members, the communication engagement of both seated and non-seated member agencies, allocation of shared seats, and the pace and complexity of 3CE operations were really driving the recommendations for a change, a proposal through the ad hoc committee to reduce the number of seats to have more effective meetings. I do want to say briefly, although the staff report describes this sort of original intent, the JPA isn't quite as clear about that. It clearly contemplated 11 members. It clearly contemplated that more members could be added, and it outlines a process for shared seats for that to occur. Here in this chart is the ad hoc committee's recommendation, where there would be 4 permanent seats for the county. There would be shared seats, Santa Barbara, San Luis Obispo, Monterey, and Santa Cruz, where it was originally part of the staff recommendation proposed that those will be done through the city selection committee process, such as other JPA appointments in our county. That large cities that are over 100,000, which includes the city of Santa Maria and city of Salinas, would have permanent seats. Originally in the recommendation, there was a right of reversion if they didn't want those. That was also later amended. And then San Benito has the county of San Benito and then the city of Hollister and San Juan Bautista are relatively small, so a shared seat was proposed there. The Operations Board ultimately approved a recommendation to the Policy Board that recommended the ad hoc subcommittee's recommendation with some amendments, and those included that the city selection committee wouldn't necessarily have to be relied upon by those that were in that category, and also removed the right of first refusal, as I just described. That motion was made, but before the motion could be considered, there was also clearly some interest in making another motion. And so after conferring with council, I, as our operations board member at that meeting as alternative here following Mr. Johnson's departure from the city, introduced a substitute motion, and that was to recommend that the policy board conduct a study session to provide more time for evaluation and outreach, and also to provide that option that didn't necessarily rely on the city selection committee process. And really what I was trying to achieve here, and thinking on behalf of the city, thinking upon the best interests of the JPA as a whole and the agency, was that we just really needed to take a little bit more time procedurally. At the time, I was trying to reach out to City Manager Yvonne Kimball from Morro Bay and had not yet even heard back. So I wasn't even aware if they knew what was being proposed. And we were hearing from other member agencies here locally that they were only just starting to learn about what was going on. So we were really trying to get a little bit more time and bring others along and make sure they understood what was really at hand, because again, a reduction of the number of seats is a big change. Also, part of that thinking was to have the policy board conduct the study session, because this is, in a lot of ways, is really policy that we're talking about here. And so, of course, we want to have operations and policy working together. So ultimately, the substitute motion failed. There were 6 ayes, 9 noes, 4 were absent. Then there was more deliberation. There were some friendly amendments that were made to the prevailing motion, including those that I described, and ultimately prevailed 11-4 with 4 absent. And now I want to take a moment to allow City Manager McDonald to describe the meeting that would occur just this afternoon with other city managers and report out from that meeting.
Thank you. First, I'd like to just take a moment and say thank you to our staff who are here for the hard work in the last few days to gather this information and put together a report and for consideration, and also to our 3 CE partners and representatives. Rob and I have spent a fair amount of time on the phone, and I know he has with a lot of our other member agencies as well. And again, same to council for agendizing this discussion. First, so we were able to convene a meeting of all of the city managers in our county, minus Paso. They weren't able to attend, but all the other city managers were in attendance, along with Rebecca Campbell, who is the county's appointed seat on the operations board, to try to discuss, essentially where are we at, and then any, kind of come to a sense of shared concerns, and then potential other options that folks might want everybody to consider, and have in mind as the policy board meets, and also as we meet this evening. There was definitely a sense that of gratitude to our council for having this conversation. I think it's going to be really helpful for our entire region to have this conversation for folks to either be listening into now or look at later. And so I'm really trying to convey discussions that happened with all of my colleagues here in the county that are really representing essentially all of our jurisdictions. So first, the overwhelming, sense is we need more time. There's a lot of options to be considered, and I'll kind of share one that was brought forward by my colleague in Atascadero, Jim Lewis, as an idea and an option that he sort of talked through with a few people. But again, it's one, and there are many moving pieces to it. So again, needing more time to evaluate not only the options, but also to clearly articulate the need. And certainly one thing that, we've talked a lot about internally, and I've also spoken to Rob Shaw about, is needing to understand the problem that we're trying to address so that we can tailor the solution to that problem and make sure that it is, the two are correlated appropriately. Having more time will certainly allow us to do that. But just to give an example of this other potential option, one was if we had more time, an additional piece of that could also be looking at essentially a graduated approach to a reduction in board membership. So rather than shrinking from 19 to 11 seats, what if there was an approach where we looked at a 14-seat board, which is an even number, and of course that's not usual, but the countervailing idea there would be if we included essentially a supermajority requirement, or 9 votes that would be required to pass or approve actions, then that would help take care of the even number board seats. But then as we discussed, is that literally every action needs 9 votes, or are we talking specific things like policy matters or contracts? Those are good questions that I'm certain we'd be able to come to a resolution on those, but we just need to be able to talk them through, not only, obviously here in our county, but with our member agencies across the 5 counties. There was a discussion similar to the city selection committee kind of questions around whether that's the best approach to how our seats would be allocated and determined amongst each other. As Bob Hill mentioned, at the operations board, there was an openness to essentially, our jurisdictions coming to a different agreement. And again, I'm sure we could come to an agreement. We just need a lot of time to figure out what does that look like, because that agreement not only could come up with how those seats are allocated, but also incorporating some reporting out requirements, or requirements that our appointed seat members really get advice and check in with their other members to make sure that everybody is aware of what's happening and that there's some level of feedback opportunity being provided. We certainly do that work currently with our shared seat member, but even if I believe City Manager Yvonne Kimball was out of town on vacation. And because this was so fast moving, we weren't able to touch base with her. That's just an example of some of the struggles we've had with kind of how we've gotten here and then what this all means for everyone. There was also a discussion around decoupling the representation on the policy board and the operations board. Currently, whatever city is appointed to this seat, they're appointed both to the policy board and to the operations board. And so there's an openness to sort of decoupling those and having an operations board member from one city and a policy board member from another city. And then there's certainly an understanding and a desire to help address any concerns around engagement and making sure that people who are on the boards have, you know, the time and capacity and, you know, all the resources they need to be able to sink into the, you know, highly technical and complicated materials that they're asked to review. I think everybody acknowledges that that is a need, and we want to make sure that those needs are being addressed in whatever format is arrived at here. I know there's a lot of additional work that could be done. I know people want to do that as well, but there was also discussion around essentially, you know, what's the order of operations here then? Are we focusing on those items first before altering board membership, or are we doing them at the same time? Certainly lots of movement is possible and needed on, it's essentially kind of an administrative end on that coordination and making sure that people have capacity and ability to sink into things. And so I think that's there's a commitment to that, but it did just sort of raise questions around which thing comes first, essentially. I think there are some concerns that there's enough momentum and movement behind this concept of reducing the number of seats on the board. And so we want to make sure people, at least the city managers wanted to make sure we were open and really at the table and part of the conversation about what that could look like or should look like, not just for our communities, but for 3CE as a whole. And so we understand there's been a lot of work that's been done on this issue at the kind of ad hoc committee level that prepared this proposal. And at the same time, just again, really needing that additional level of time and kind of looking at things from a sequential fashion rather than just going from 19 to 11. So those were some of the conversations we had today. Happy to answer any other questions as we move forward.
Thank you for that synopsis of what happened today. That was really helpful. As you said, everything's moving kind of fast, and we're trying to make sure we get the information to us, but also back out. Mr. Hill.
I'm just going to complete the presentation, and then we'll certainly get into the discussion if that seems right. Well, first and foremost, I do want to acknowledge that, you know, the ad hoc committee did present a little bit more about what they were thinking and where they were coming from during the presentation at the operations board meeting on the 14th, and including some of the other options. There were a couple of options around 9 members, and there were the 11 members, and they indicated that they had considered weighted seats, or one seat but with weighting, such as how many other CCAs in California have their JPA structured. And so I wanted to just be clear, however, we were only just hearing those alternatives at the meeting, so it was hard to digest those and really react to those at the time. The other thing that City Manager McDonald mentioned was this, what can we do to improve practices for how boards are conducted in the first place, making sure we have engagement, that folks are understanding what they're voting on, that they're prepared to be there, and that part of this process could include a code of conduct and onboarding commitments and things like that to make sure. So that I want to be faithful to the original staff report and where 3CE and the ad hoc committee were coming from in describing those. So just in terms of where we are next, I do want to appreciate Mr. Shaw and 3CE for scheduling the special policy board meeting that will take place It sounds like that will in fact occur on August 26th at 1 p.m. So that is a special meeting to consider the approved Operations Board motion, discuss alternative governance approaches, provide feedback to 3C staff on next steps. There's an explicit invitation to all 35 members, including what are called limited member seats, where folks can come and participate in the discussion, although they can't vote, their name won't count towards a quorum, that kind of a thing. And then on September 19th is the annual meeting in Aptos for 3CE, where both the Operations Board and Policy Board will meet, along with other, educational plenary sessions and things like that. And so the JPA does specify a 30-day notice upon which JPA amendments can take place. So we did receive that notice by registered mail. And so the soonest that the policy board could take action would be at that annual meeting on the 19th. As we discussed in the staff report, there, in terms of alternatives, of course there are many, but to provide feedback and or direction to the city's appointed policy board member, Councilmember Marks, regarding the city's response to the proposed amendments. And the response to the proposed amendments could include one or more of the options. Mr. Shaw, in his email requesting the special meeting, outlined a couple, pursuing the JPA amendments to implement the recommendation, or some other alternative proposal, allowing for further study, tabling the matter, or for remaining at the 19 board seats, but implementing the other components that were outlined. Again, we're talking about code of conduct, onboarding, maybe other rotation, other mechanisms that can lead towards a more effective board meeting, and that's more productive and efficient, where folks have a chance there where they can really deliberate and get in there. Another alternative could be that our council could appoint its own ad hoc committee to develop a letter to 3C Policy Board, giving the council's feedback and any or the direction regarding the proposed amendments to the JPA. Again, we want to make space for the council to have its discussion, and again, the recommendation is to provide a consensus recommendation to the policy board regarding the proposed amendments and related to the number and method of apportionment of seating board members, or I'm sorry, board directors to its policy and operations boards. So that's the recommendation from the staff report. What I'll do here is I'll bring it back to some of these alternatives, maybe. That seems right. And that concludes our presentation.
Great, thank you so much. Thank you for pulling this together so quickly, as we all got to see each other yesterday in our city council meeting and then come back again today. But I really appreciate all of the change. You know, I just wrote down very quickly, it was, you know, the 13th that I saw the agenda item, the 14th that the board was meeting, and Councilmember Marks and I were talking. 16th, I got a hold of Morro Bay as quickly as I could and let them know what was happening with the mayor, Wixom. You know, we got the email that said the changes. I started watching the video of what was happening from the ops meeting, and here we are today with already a staff report. So I just really thank you for this. And you can't do anything fast if you want to actually have people know what's happening. And so I think that's one of the challenges with, I think, government and non-governmental organizations as well, and trying to have representation and do work fast. So I really appreciate you.
Thank you, Mayor. It's a team effort. It's an honor and a pleasure to do the work.
Thank you. So I'm gonna, go ahead.
People may have questions.
Yep, that's what my next thing is. So I'm going to move to, if there's questions before I go into my spiel of things. But I want to know from my council member if you have initial questions before we have public comment and go into asking questions maybe of 3C if they're open to it as well. Councilmember Schwarzman.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you everybody for throwing this together very, very quickly. I guess I'm still, and I don't know who this is a question for, I'm still a little unclear as to how we got here. How, I guess, to me, my understanding of how things work is that an ad hoc committee would be established by, this came from the operation, an ad hoc committee of the operations board. So my first question is, was there a discussion at some point at the operations committee about the need for an ad hoc committee? And again, going back to, I think, what City Manager McDonald said, what's the actual problem that we're trying to solve? And I'm not hearing that answer to that. So I don't know who can answer that.
Thank you, Councilmember Shorsman, I'm happy to take a start, and I'm sure there are others that can further develop the response. The staff report for the item number 12 for August 14th describes that following an administrative review process, the ad hoc committee was impaneled, and that the chair, Jamie Goldstein from Capitola, then selected other members. During the discussion on August 14th, it was also mentioned that the policy board had discussions about this, and that they were expecting the operations board to bring forward a recommendation. So that's a recapturing of the discussion in the staff report that took place. As far as the problem goes, I think that it's a really great question. In my experience, policy analysis starts with a good problem definition. What is the problem we're trying to solve? And if we have a good definition, then hopefully we'll solve the problem. I think that what we've heard anecdotally and has been alluded to is that we really want to make sure that board members are tuned into this. And, the business of energy and energy procurement and programs is complex. The agenda reports, oftentimes like yours, could be 300, 400, 500 pages with long contracts and things like that. So wanting to make sure that board members are engaged, that they understand the material that they're voting on, and that they're willing to, and able to participate. So I think that's a part of it. And then I think, again, I'm sort of gathering information and things that have been said. And also, so we have, when everybody's attending, which isn't always the case, we have 19 members that are sitting in 4 different rooms. So the opportunity to have that kind of robust dialogue and deliberation where everybody has a chance to be heard and be part of the process can be challenging, right? And I think it can also be challenging for members of the public. How can you meaningfully participate, and how do I attend one of these meetings? So I just want to offer that response as what I've been able to understand from the conversations that took place in the meeting and from the staff reports and so forth. And I'm sure our city manager can further elaborate.
And I will say, after listening to the entire ops board meeting, and I don't know if Mr. Shaw, you just want to come to the podium because you might be able to give some better answers, but Mr. Shaw did say at that time that in May, he tasked the chair of the ops board to create an ad hoc task force. So it didn't come from the board like we would typically create an ad hoc committee and give guidance from the ad hoc committee or to the ad hoc committee. That part didn't happen on the ops board. City manager?
Thank you. Yes, I wanted to just add that same clarification. It's our understanding, and certainly Mr. Shaw can elaborate more, that the direction to discuss this issue really came out of an annual review process, and that the direction was essentially to evaluate governance options and address, concerns, or, I'm definitely butchering that because it had more actual specific words, but it didn't explicitly say reduce the number of members of the board, but it was to address concerns around operations of governance operations. Two ideas together. The creation of the ad hoc committee, though, did not actually occur at a meeting of the operations board. It was done essentially separate from that, and I believe there were 5 different representatives who met and discussed this issue. For our county, Matt Bronson, the city manager of Grover Beach, was invited to attend a couple of those meetings to kind of help provide our piece of that puzzle, which he did participate in a couple of those. And I think because of vacations and the summer schedules and different things going on, we weren't kind of looped back into the outcomes of that as we maybe otherwise would have at our monthly meetings that we hold together. But from that committee, that's how our piece of that puzzle was added in.
Thank you. And then my last question is there a specific deadline or requirement? I understand that this has happened very quickly, and maybe that's just out of desire to solve a problem or problems that I'm still not totally clear what all of them are. But is there a a deadline or a time frame within which we really need to make decisions as a board and as a policy and operations board for 3CE?
There's certainly no kind of legal issue or
Okay.
impending, requirement of the state or anything like that. I think the timing concerns are maybe largely around the membership of the board will change next year. And so I think that may be kind of speaking to, it's hard to get an initiative like this across the finish line if we're needing to re-educate new board members every 2 years. Although it's my understanding the proposal does not include a change to the terms themselves. They're still at 2 years. And so we would continue on the 2-year rotation system. And so I think that's maybe the concern on timing, but there's no.
To get it done before the end of the year so that okay, thank you.
Thank you. And along with that, the staggering did not occur as well on that ops board from what I saw. So that wasn't a final desire, right?
It was not included in the motion itself. I
Great.
mean, I'm
Yeah,
sure that's
thank you.
not, off the table, but it wasn't what the operations board included in their recommendation.
Perfect. Thank you. Councilmember Marks?
I would like to, if it's okay, I'd like to invite Mr. Shaw to come to the podium and maybe help us. We're trying to read your guys' minds, and maybe you could just directly tell us the answer to these two basic questions. What's the problem and what's the rush? Those are the two basic questions that I have.
Thank you, Councilmember Marks and Director Marks. First of all, I just want to say thank you very much, Mayor, Council, for having this meeting. I think San Luis Obispo has, throughout its history with 3CE, been a leader and been a collaborative partner, probably most prominent around our programs, really looking and working with my staff, and I deeply appreciate that. And I also deeply appreciate the conversations with City Manager McDonald. Congratulations, the title is now fresh. But also her leadership around this issue and pulling the county together. I really appreciate that ability to spend some time and get acquainted with the topics. I think, I want to be able to address a couple of quick things. I do think the staggering, if staggering means city manager versus others, is part of the recommendation from the operations board.
There was that, and also the different terms of maybe, so that the terms would not everyone leaving at the same time.
I think what they were suggesting, or what they did, is I had identified other areas that I thought the operations board should dig into. They did not dig into them, and they said, let's pull all of those forward to the policy board. And let me start with the first one, which is timing and urgency. I don't believe there is timing, and it's up to the policy board what actions the policy board wants to take around this. So this is an opportunity to move the ad hoc committee's recommendation through the operations board. The operations board has now voted. I think Bob had it up there, 10 to 4 or 11 to 4, to move the conversation forward, because that's where it belongs, is with the policy board. So the speed at which we move, the process moving forward from the policy board is completely within the policy board's discretion. And I guess since I mentioned process, let me just say, we've had a number of conversations and they haven't stopped. Either the ad hoc committee members, myself, your city manager, the city managers here and in other jurisdictions, with my chief communications officer. We hear those concerns. I agree with the concerns. I think there's a lot of lessons learned that we can apply in future opportunities to ensure that we're having more conversations. So I really do appreciate that. I absolutely hear those concerns. From the agency's perspective, we can do better, and I will do better around having those conversations. To the why are we here? It did come out of the administrative review process, and the board set a goal to have a recommendation come forward regarding governance and board size. every question that was asked, it was a facilitated review. So this review went to all members, but there were certain members that were interviewed, and the executive committee, as well as some other thought leaders on the board, were all interviewed by the facilitator. And the answer to every question, a component of the answer to every question: what are the challenges for the agency? What are the opportunities for the agency? What should the CEO focus on? What is challenging, sort of like in terms of accomplishing our goals? Governance and the size of the board specifically came up. I went back to refresh myself around those comments, and I think we can get into like what each comment was trying to accomplish, but I think there are two primary areas that come up for me. One is if we have constant rotation, and I said this during the meeting, so I'm sorry if you watched it, but we have, I think, 14 members that we will be rotating off or are scheduled to. Whether they actually do is sometimes a different story. We have 9 permanent seats, and only 4 of them are not going to rotate, even though they're permanent seats, due to retirements and elections and other things. So it is a little bit disruptive. It is challenging. There's an opportunity, I think, for us to improve onboarding. And these recommendations, I think, staff will bring forward regardless. A code of conduct that lays out, obligations and expectations of staff, of board members, both to each other and to non-seated members. A procedures process where non-seated members can bring issues forward to the board. More engagement, more opportunity to connect with larger boards and also the public in our very large jurisdiction. So we'll move forward with those recommendations. The two things, governance, size of boards. With the very large turnover, it is difficult to do long-term strategic planning. And then the second issue, I think, that was identified is exactly as articulated by City Manager McDonald, the ability to dig in to really critical, complex issues. It's not just big issues about, where are our values and where do we want to be. Those are important. Those are big strategic planning questions that have to be answered. But from a practical day-to-day standpoint, the speed at which this agency moves, having people that are willing to invest the time, willing to be leaders, willing to engage, and frankly, willing to go out and work with their communities to help keep people informed, because we are very large. It's not 5. It's not 19, it's not 36. We have alternates, so it gets much larger. So this is a big undertaking to keep everybody engaged. But that willingness is critical, and I think we as staff can do better in functionalizing and formalizing our onboarding so that people can hit the ground running. But what I've heard from all of my board members, whether they're permanent or otherwise, is it takes at least a year to understand the agency. And that's even before they get into the complex regulatory environment that dictates the agency. So those are the concerns that I heard as part of the administrative review that led to setting the recommendation that the goal for the agency to look at this and have a recommendation come forward. But I will say that every 19 members of those boards that participated in that process, their definition of what that looks like is completely different. So from a staff perspective, the way to approach that was to ask our professional managers, our city managers that have been living and working with this agency for a number of years, to look at what does governance look like. This is the feedback and direction of the board. What are your recommendations? What are your thoughts around this? This is the recommendation that committee brought forward. And really until the operations board looks at that and says, do we think this is valid? Do we think there are other opportunities? What do we want to move forward? I think it is difficult from a staff perspective to get in front of that. I think they had really honest, hard conversations in those meetings about what is effectiveness and what is the performance that they all bring to the table. But we're now at what I would consider the start of the process. We have brought that conversation forward. The operations board has looked at it and said, from our perspective as professional managers, this is an important conversation to move forward. Now it goes to the policy board, and the policy board, as I said, it's up to them where this goes forward, what process would be defined. I'm sorry, you asked me a simple question. I have no idea how long I've talked, but I can address questions or sit back down and allow you to have your conversation.
Well, I have a few more questions that go exactly with what you're saying. So if you don't mind, I'll just ask them now. One of the things that I kept hearing was around kind of maybe less participation or less engagement of some of the board members. And so when I think about that, does a code of conduct not already exist or an onboarding not already exist for 3CE?
An onboarding does exist, and it continues to improve year over year. It is sometimes difficult. We sometimes have board members roll off, and then depending on elections and certifying and sitting seats, most appointments don't happen until sometime in the first week or second week of January. And we have our first operations board meeting in January and our first policy board meeting in February. There is an onboarding process that is sometimes very rushed. And when you're talking about an agency that's $760 million operation with 1.4 million customers and very complex regulatory structure around it, that onboarding is a continual learning exercise for board members and for staff alike.
That makes absolute sense. And I think about whether it's 19 or 11, though, that same issue will still happen. You'll still have elections, you'll still have retirements from the professionals that work at the cities, and then January will still be that time period where we would have that rotation. So I'm just wondering if almost, is it a shift in timing of the meeting that it happens towards the end of January or beginning of February instead, or the quantity doesn't seem as though it's the actual issue because the people would still be rotating and moving out, whether it's 11 people or 19. So that was, I couldn't understand that difference. Can you help me out with that?
What I would say is that from an operations standpoint, we will manage this agency. What I have identified are issues that the board members have highlighted. And whether it's 11, whether it's 19, whether it's 14, all of those are a manageable board size. It's really going to be about how quickly, how engaged, how much ownership all of those board members have. I mean, candidly, I think there are a lot of studies that are available that say when an agency gets too large in a board size, what happens is a deferment to staff. And you can look at the voting record of this agency. I like to think that it's a product of just very thorough professional staff work. But I'm also aware that a lot of people are looking to thought leaders around the table. Where does that person sit? Because I may not be as comfortable with these issues.
That makes sense too. Thank you so much. I appreciate hearing that. And then when I go back to the smaller board, you know, on a different board, I had to go from 44 people to 22 people. I understand the logic around efficiencies and engagement, and making a smaller board is probably very helpful. And when we look at representation that people expected to have as they were slowly joining on as cities, and I think of, you know, I'm not an amazing math person. I couldn't tell you what 11 divided by 17 equals, but when I transfer it over, 11, 17, 22, 35, we're kind of at the same space. We're actually less, as we've grown, we even have a little bit less representation versus the 35. I'm not asking for more, but what I'm saying is it doesn't seem as though we've grown exponentially from the amount of coverage we have now in locations and areas. So just trying to think about how do we make that a little bit more gradual. And during the ops board, I didn't really hear of a gradual opportunity. And I wondered why that wasn't discussed as an option, or maybe it was in the ad hoc committee, but just not brought to the ops board.
I don't recall it being discussed, but I think the ad hoc committee met many times without me. But I would say that is something that I have heard over the last week and a half. Should we look at a gradual process? And at the end of the day, from a staff perspective, and I think from the board perspective, and when I see the work that the operations board members are putting in around this issue, everybody cares deeply about what is the right way for this agency to be successful long term. And as part of that, I think their guiding principles are really where they were. From my perspective, we're an agency of 35. And that means that there's a lot of work both by the board members that are sitting there and by staff to make sure that we're an agency of 35. So having additional recommendations, filtering them in, I think those are all valid areas that the policy board will wrestle with. From staff perspective, it's really all about how do we better serve all 35 member agencies and build a consensus that can help us keep all 35 member agencies.
Thank you. Councilmember Marks.
Yeah, I had a question also for Mr. Shaw. We're putting you on the spot here, sorry. But I haven't had a chance to research all the other, there are 10 CCAs, and I haven't had a chance to research, but I did go to Marin since it's the oldest. They have 38 members on their policy board. And so my question is, have you talked to any of your colleagues with large boards about how they handle the problem, or if they even consider it a problem?
I have talked with a number of my colleagues where a lot of those very large boards work. They work in two different ways. One, a lot of subcommittees, which if you look at CPA, I think they have 4 to 6 Brown Act meetings every week. They have, I think, 3 clerks in order to be able to do that. They're a much bigger operation than we are. If you look at Marin, I think Marin is still using a weighted vote approach. Weighted vote approach for our jurisdiction doesn't work well when you start looking at percentages of population or where customers are, how much electricity that they're using. It doesn't provide the real, or I should say, the ad hoc committee looked at this and dismissed it. We also had a governance committee back in 2001 that looked at this as well and dismissed the weighted vote recommendations.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate your being here. My question is really about process, and so I understand that Monday will be a study session of the policy board. And so I guess my question is, as you were noting, in a big board like that, there's going to be a lot of reliance on a staff recommendation, staff report, and what's coming out of that operations committee. Based on the feedback that you're hearing, what do you anticipate will be part of that presentation in terms of reasonable next steps? Is it kind of understanding it's completely up to the policy board, but I'm wondering, if the policy board is not comfortable with the proposal that's been presented, what would be the next steps? Would there try to be a study set or a new ad hoc committee from the policy board in order to get it ready in time for that September vote? Or would you suggest that, it rolls into the new year? How do you think that's going to kind of play out on Monday?
Well, I think I have not had an opportunity to work closely with the chair or vice chair on the process, and I'm still waiting. I got an opportunity to see another recommendation this evening. So I'll have an opportunity on the drive home and tomorrow to start building out what a staff presentation would look like. I anticipate the ad hoc committee and other representatives that are bringing proposals forward to lay those out. But ultimately, the policy board will set their direction. There won't be a staff recommendation around this issue for Monday. And I think the most important word in the presentation that we saw from Bob was potentially. So there is no agenda for September 19th. There's no, at this point, staff report approving. We need direction from the policy board. So I think polling the special meeting, while a heavy lift, while getting a quorum meant a short window, getting that direction from them, it's more from, the notice that we sent is more about, we have a formal recommendation from the operations board and we want to give sort of the full capability of the policy board to make a decision, should they so wish.
Terrific, thank you.
More question for you. So then the city selection committee, is there a reason that the ops board thought that everyone should go through that city selection committee versus the shared seats being able to create their own potentially new selection process because their entire representation would be changed?
For the ad hoc committee, I think when they looked at city selection, they were looking for a ready-made, easily, that's a process that's set by statute, everybody knows how it works, and it's leaving the decision still with cities, because the city mayors generally, not maybe in every county, staff that. At the operations board, I do think that members did work really hard to take components of the alternate recommendation and pull them into the recommendation, trying to build consensus. So the recommendation that came forward is use city selection committee, or as we do now, if you're in a shared seat, you can come up with your own process for doing so.
Great, thank you. That wasn't clear from the MOU conversation, so I probably just didn't process that as much. City manager.
Thank you. I just had one kind of point of clarification and letting folks know that we did, as Mr. Hill mentioned, we did receive formal notice of a potential for amending the JPA at essentially giving us 30 days notice. So it could occur by that notice that we received at the annual board meeting on September 19th. So I just want to make sure everybody is aware, although of course the policy board could take a different approach. We really don't know, but we do know that they could very well act on that meeting to make this amendment. It requires a 2/3 approval. And so even if all of the representatives from our county, which I don't know, how that would go, but it could still prevail and this action could be taken. So I just want to make sure if folks are listening that that's the way things could unfold. We don't know, but it's been presented and set up in such a way that that could happen.
And that's really in relation to the next steps, possibilities.
Right.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I don't see any other questions from my colleagues, so I'll move forward to public comment.
Yes, we have 2 public comment. The first one is, and I'm sorry, I'm going to mess this up, John Smigelski? And
It
then,
wasn't going to be Eric if you couldn't pronounce it. So.
okay, and the other one is Eric Viam. Just one second, let me get the timer up for you.
Okay, so thank you. I really appreciate that you're having this meeting. I really appreciate Bob Hill's comments at the meeting and raising this issue up. I just want to make a couple of points. Just like Jan said, what do other CCAs do? One, I look to as more of a superior CCA in terms of performance, but the standards that are important to me. Peninsula Clean Energy, 21 board members. They have an executive committee of 12. They function. I don't view, I'm a member of Solar Climate Coalition. I'm also a member of the California Alliance of Community Energy. So I have a kind of a statewide view and talk to other people, and sad to say, Rob, they're not the top CCA. They're kind of like in the middle, and others are better, particularly on things like solar. But, and I see the initiative to improve the functioning of the boards. But what's missing from the conversation is, well, how about community input? Okay, over the last few years, you can look at the meetings, how many fewer people are commenting. Okay, the Community Advisory Council, I think it's still functioning well at bylaws and not a way for community a forum for community to engage with the community. CCAs are formed 10 or so years ago because people cared about where the energy came from. That voice is being kind of snuffed out. And so how about part of this process is how can we improve community engagement as part of this governance structure? Don't just look at how can we make meetings run smoother. That seems to happen all the time anyway. I think at the policy board meeting, the operating board meeting, Rob mentioned they could work with a 19-person board. They have. So why? Promises were made to you when you joined. Okay, you're going to have a shared seat, a task to join. Or you're going to have a shared seat. You're going to have 3 shared seats. Why is this changing? And so for me as a community member, who do I go to see if I want to make a comment in the future? I could talk to Jan, and I could talk to Dawn, but other people are talking to Dawn. and should be, you know, the delusion of voice and the like. So I appreciate what you're doing. I'm proud of what you're doing. And let's bring the community focus to this. You know, other people do better. Thank you.
Thank you.
Honorable Mayor and Council, Eric Vium, Chair of Slow Climate Coalition. Thank you for holding this meeting. Thank you for staff, especially Bob Hill's engagement on the ops board. Thank you, Whitney, for bringing the city managers together. This is a major issue. This is a major decision before 3CE. And so the concern that you're feeling is well, you know, you're well within your right to feel those concerns. I was personally deeply troubled to see the ops board move forward this proposal in light of a very reasonable alternative to dig deeper into this conversation. The staff report for this major governance change was 4 pages when there is significant, like, what are alternatives, what was it considered, what was the pros and cons, board size considerations, what are other CCAs doing. There just seems like this as a step through the ad hoc committee was an opportunity to actually inform the policy board and the community about the considerations around governance as a place to start a conversation. And this felt like it was closing a conversation, personally. And so the timing pressure, the fact we're having an emergency special meeting on Monday, you know, leading up to it, just like, stop, please. So I just want to be really conscientious about the importance of representation, and that you know, this is fundamentally, community choice programs are fundamentally democratic public agencies, and we should not be taking significant governance changes that are reducing representation. The city selection committee, if it's politicized, Slow City may never have a position on the 3C board again. If it's rotated in a you know, rational fashion, every 14 years, Slow City would have representation on that board. So I'm deeply concerned about those things. And then just term lengths, 2 years. Mr. Shaw said a year to get up to speed on very complex issues, and then a year before you're rotated off. And so any seats that are not permanent have the tendency to be less informed, less empowered, and less able to represent the interests of their communities and their voices. And so I think we really need to look at those dimensions. And really the alternatives, like, what are the alternatives? Let's see the whole, I was appreciative of Jim Lewis coming forward with creative ideas. Awesome, Jim. I want to see a lot more of that. Even to thinking about, and this has been floated in the past, what about district elections for this CCA? That's directly democratic, could provide a manageable board size, and allow people to really dig in a professional capacity to guide the direction and vision of this organization. Thank you for the time and for hosting this meeting.
Thank you so much. Well, that looks like the end of our public comment. We'll bring it back to, first, I guess, any staff response you feel necessary after all the questions and public comment. City Manager?
I think I would just want to, you know, reiterate, I think the discussion is largely coming from the public, is largely why we are here today. We, you know, have concerns, and we also want to give an opportunity to our public to come and hear the same and share the same. And I think that there's certainly an element of, we joined 3CE as to have an opportunity to have a voice in our energy procurement and provision. And so the rules that were in effect when we joined are what everybody is expecting. I can tell you that, as an example, Morro Bay has not yet actually taken the chance to sit on the board, and they very much would like to do that, very much. And there's a huge concern that essentially they may never be on the board again. And it could very well happen that our city may have the same experience for one reason or another. And so that I just wanted to let you know those conversations are certainly happening, and I think we kind of share some of those same concerns. Again, it could be that everything works out at the end of the day, but we also wanted to provide an opportunity to, again, just talk through what does that look like, and is there a way that we might have more time in order to give us an opportunity to come along with and understand what the issues are, why are we doing this, and then this truly is the correct solution that we're all looking for. So just wanted to thank folks for coming out on this short notice as well, and also for anybody who is listening, because I do know there are others around the county who are very interested in the conversation we're having here tonight as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know that Mayor Hammond would have liked to attend as well today, but he was out. Part of the rush of this day, a rush of this meeting is people had summer plans, and that's what people do every summer. And so he really would have liked to have been able to provide some feedback here. I will move forward to Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you. Just maybe one more clarifying question, just because I want to make sure that we're not over analyzing. For the study session on Monday, will the policy board be the ones who are making a recommendation to put this on the agenda, or is it already on the agenda to have this recommendation at the September meeting? I guess what I'm checking to see is, will the policy board be making a vote on Monday to forward this for a formal adoption vote? And it makes a difference, because in terms of, again, if there's a study session versus a direction, right? And then what is, usually that would have a staff recommendation, et cetera. So is there some clarification on that piece of the process?
Mr. Hill?
Yes, thanks for the question. Thank you for the question. So the agenda report for next Monday hasn't published yet. However, our understanding is that the policy board could recommend that to have it on the agenda at the September meeting, and that would be legally actionable because the 30-day notice has been given. Of course, the policy board has the prerogative to continue to deliberate or to form another committee or to put it back to the operations board. So those things are all on the table.
Got it. So it is it's a hearing, there's a vote in order to put it on that agenda, right? Am I misunderstanding? Or that's at a study session, you can give direction
It's possibly is the answer. It depends. City
Okay.
Manager?
Okay, maybe that's a nuance, that doesn't matter, so that's
Well,
okay.
No, I think it's a really good question, and I can't say for certain because it depends on how the item is phrased, but it could be that absent an explicit direction to not agendize it, it would be on the agenda on September 19th. And I think the way, but it all depends on how the report and the item is written. But given that we have received notice that there's an intent to potentially make this amendment, it could happen on the 19th unless the policy board on Monday says definitely don't do that.
Gotcha, okay, so it's already kind of agendized, as it were.
I think it could be, it could be, but I don't know, maybe there are other, 3CE's rules and the way that items get onto an agenda. I'm sure that could change.
Okay, I don't want to.
Councilmember Marks might answer that as well. Councilmember Marks?
Yeah, I just want to address that. Putting it another way, it could not be, the proposal could not be approved if we hadn't received the 30-day notice. I mean, it could not have, the only way that they had to give us 30 days notice if the policy board decides to reject the proposal and to stick with the status quo, which is my position, what I would like to see, then the fact that we've received that notice wouldn't make any difference at all because we're not going to go there. However, it won't be a live option. It would not be a live option unless they actually did give that legal notice, because they're required under the JPA to give the 30-day notice. Is that correct? Yeah. Good, okay, well, I'll let other people go first, but I have a lot to say, okay.
Vice Mayor Beasley.
I would appreciate actually hearing your perspective first, if that's all right. And just because that way, if it varies from ours, then we can
Okay.
weigh in differently. Thanks.
Sounds good to me.
Okay. Well, one of the things, when I look at the website for 3CE, one of the things that I think is featured prominently and was actually very attractive when we were trying to persuade other cities between 2017 and 2019 to join, and then also later the county and city of Atascadero, is local control. It's all over the website, local control. So to me, this proposal goes in exactly the opposite direction from local control. So it's reducing the reduction of representation by the cities, to me, has a lot of different consequences. One of them is this whole question of what's called community engagement. But the other thing is, everybody knows where their city council is. They know how to go to a city council meeting and have a public comment. They know our email address. They meet us in the grocery store. We were talking about that. And they want to talk about these issues, right? So there's a lot more local communication through the cities. And what this proposal does is it consolidates a lot more of the power, if you want to call it that, to make decisions in the counties. And in that, it reduces the input of the 35 cities. And so that means that people are going to have less access to the decision makers who sit on these two boards, including the ops board, but especially the policy board. So that's something that I find deeply disturbing. The section 3.1, excuse me, .4 of the JPA says explicitly, once a JPA reaches more than 11 member agencies, the Policy and Operations Board composition shall shift to a regional allocation based on population size. This allocation shall be one seat for each jurisdiction with a population of 50,000 and above. We're getting close there, but not yet. And shared seats for jurisdictions with populations below 50,000 allocated on a sub-regional basis as set forth in Exhibit C. And notwithstanding the above, the County of San Benito shall be allotted one seat. Okay, so what that means is that the people in Atascadero and Paso Robles get to talk with each other. The people in Grover, AG, and Pismo get to talk with each other, and they are communities of interest. And we get to talk with Morro Bay, and you know, a lot of people who live in Morro Bay actually work in the city. So, and there's, you know, the communities of interest in that regard. If you look at like the way that districting is handled. So I feel that the process has been flawed. The process of bringing it to this situation has been flawed. I think that the ad hoc committee, the selection of the people on that ad hoc committee was improper, and that's a harsh word, but that's my feeling. They were handpicked by the CEO. They did not include anybody from our county who was a sitting ops board member. Matt Bronson used to be on the ops board, but he switched jobs, and so he no longer was on the ops board. They could have picked Bob Hill. They could have picked Mr. Downing. There are other people in our county who are on the ops board who could have been in that ad hoc group, and possibly would have had some input that would have moderated this kind of reductionist kind of proposal that they've come up with. Also, I think the process should have been initiated by the policy board and not the ops board, if it's a matter of policy. And now we're in a situation where I can't imagine that by Monday, first of all, a lot of these entities don't even know that this is out there. If there's no staff report, no presentation of alternatives, people are going to be looking at each other and going, what? I guess I should have done my homework. It's like, oh, I'm supposed to come up with a solution right now. It's going to be very difficult for people who have not been following this closely to even know. The reason that I knew that this was coming up is because I'm a wonk when it comes to this 3CE stuff. I read everything, right? And so when the ops board agenda came up, I thought, oh, what are they looking at? And I came to item number 12. I said, whoa, this is very it's disturbing. So the other thing is that besides the process, I think the outcome would be very bad for 3CE. And it's not just because it's a reduction of local control, it's a reduction of the access and influence of the cities, but also I think it's going to start people talking about, well, if we're not able to have a seat on the policy board or the ops board, what other alternatives are there? And people are going to start thinking about alternatives. And I did have a conversation with John Hammond, who is on vacation with his family, but he found a place he could get reception. And he said that he would reject the proposal, he objects to it, and he's thinking Paso might have other alternatives. And so I think that's what, we worked so hard to get to what I'm calling build out, and I feel like this proposal is seizing destruction from the jaws of victory. It's so silly to me. It's very disturbing that right now this issue is coming up. It's divisive, it is counterproductive, and I think the proposal as it stands should be rejected. That's my opinion, so thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for sharing your thoughts and your history as well.
Yeah.
Vice Mayor Pease.
Thank you for that. I really appreciate. I appreciate Councilmember Marks, your well, one, just the policy wonk who's reading. That's more than I consistently do. So thank you for that. And I agree with the overall approach. I do appreciate that. I understand that concern of the large board, especially for those original members, that 19 feels like a lot. It feels kind of unruly. And in general, I'm certainly open to, an inclusive process that could downsize a board. However, not now. I think there's the potential of a bait and switch kind of sense for those communities, Morro Bay, that was going to rotate on, Atascadero, they joined with certain representation. So I do agree that it's counterproductive, and I appreciate that. And then if there if and when there's agreed upon, with this built-out board to do something different with the size, in an open process, thorough, that it might have more consideration of community input, et cetera. So I do think that there are other strategies that have been identified in terms of onboarding and commitment and all those types of things. So that seemed like one of the options, to incorporate those recommendations. I haven't studied them closely, but I think that there are good policies there. And I guess my last comment would just be that I think it's appropriate for staff to 3CE staff to make a strong recommendation to not go forward, that it is bad for the organization, that it is counterproductive, and it could have unintended consequences. So I hope that we don't just rely on what came out of the operations board. I think we need a bit of a stronger feedback on that piece.
Thank you, Vice Mayor. Councilmember Francis.
Yeah, thank you, Vice Mayor Pease and Councilmember Marks, for all of your comments. I really appreciated getting all of that context and your thoughts on this, especially since I know you've been so involved. I hear the valid concerns about rotation leading to a loss of institutional knowledge, and the concerns about a dispersed board from the meeting that we all listened in on. But I still am just not seeing the answers to those concerns in the proposed solutions that we have in front of us right now. I think we've heard a lot of really great ideas about, increasing the number of permanent seats and even some more creative solutions like district elections, getting more community input here. I don't obviously have the answers today. This isn't my board. I haven't been a part of it, but I'll be another voice for encouraging slowing this process, and hopefully we can put the brakes on, make this a more inclusive process, and do it right. If it needs modification, I'm open to that, but I also really think that as Councilmember Marks mentioned, the focus has been local control, and that needs to be the primary focus moving forward. So thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Shorsman.
Thank you. Yes, I don't think I'm going to say too much different than what I've heard my colleagues say already. I think in looking at what you need to do tomorrow on our behalf, I am supportive with doing what you can to stop this from happening in the short term. I think it's like you said, or somebody said, it's been a flawed process and too rushed. I also am not hearing, I'm hearing the problems and I understand them. I actually came here today from being chair of the Homeless Services Oversight Commission, which has 34 seats on it. And it has some issues with that. There are definitely problems with having a big board, but there are also problems with having a small board. Sometimes quorum is harder to get, for example, on a small board than it is on a big board. And even on a big board, we sometimes have problems with our quorum for HSOC. So I understand and agree that there are issues. No system is perfect, but I think we need to, I think that the 3CE policy board needs to slow down and have a little bit more time for a more public process where we can actually look at each individual problem. Maybe the analysis is look at the problem, look at the possible solutions to actually hit at that problem. And maybe some of the things that Councilmember Francis mentioned are some of the right solutions, and maybe they'll do the trick rather than reducing representation, which has its whole set of problems and can cause alienation in all of our populations that, as many of you have said, have come to rely on the amount of representation that we and the other cities and jurisdictions have on the board. So let's just try to slow this down, and if it needs to be addressed further, let's look at it from if you can, look at it from a problem solution orientation rather than just making a quick decision about this.
Thank you. And I think, going back to item 12 of the Ops Board, I went back and I relooked again at the ad hoc committee consideration of smaller boards, greater ownership and accountability, enhanced communication, more efficient board meetings, and increased opportunities for involvement. I think there are so many ways to achieve those four goals beyond just making a group smaller. An inefficient, smaller group won't be any better necessarily if that was the concern. So I'd really love to, if there is any way to encourage during the policy meeting that these four be focused on as they had been tasked versus just magically hoping that a smaller board will do all of that by just being smaller. I think that the community input part, local control, having community choice were two things that I heard so many times from people on all realms of the political spectrum. And so taking that away seems to me to really not support what the community has been asking for and why they would support a community choice energy and why they would, support a CCA. And I hope also in the policy committee, even if this does go further to the September 19th voting decision, that you could maybe encourage them to bring forward those CCA best practices that they are already looking at and can share more community-wide so we can understand that better. And I think that one thing I did hear in the ops board that I think would go towards those 4 goals that we can do now in this current structure of representation, as well as whatever future representation happens, is formalizing the sharing of info. I heard that numerous times, and I think that's still probably a really good idea, which is what is the exact process that we share information with Morro Bay, or San Benito shares with someone else in their area. I think having a more clear process from 3CE's expectations is really a good idea. I think we should look at what can we put in place to make as tools and resources, make it easier and a better process for anyone coming in and getting that 1-year ramp up maybe a little quicker and a little bit better. And then that way, when the rotation does happen, people aren't completely lost. So that's my 2 cents for your meeting on Monday. I know you already, as you already shared, have a lot to say, and I appreciate what you had to say. And I believe you have one more thing right now.
Yeah. Well, I like the idea of having an ad hoc committee to help me put together a letter, because it will make me feel so much more secure if I go to represent our city's point of view. I want to make sure that I do a very good job and don't just get so overwhelmed with the moment that I forget, oh God, I forgot that. Like, I did forget to say that I did talk to John Hammond. Did I mention that?
You did.
He's completely against it. And then we have this letter from Carla Wickstrom, the mayor of Morro Bay, basically saying the same thing, that she's against the proposal. Is that correct? Yeah, so it would be helpful, and I'm wondering if the mayor would be willing to work with me on writing a letter.
Absolutely. As I'm your alternate, I'd be happy to do that with you.
You're my alternate, but.
And also to tie in Mayor Wixom and Mayor Hammond and anyone else in our county's input from the elected side as well, to be able to put that
you have
together.
that perspective, yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. So if that can be our consensus, that we will write a letter. And this is Wednesday, and apparently there's no staff report coming out for the Monday meeting? There's no 3CE. Will there be a 3CE staff report? See, we're so spoiled, we're used to getting it at least a week in advance, so.
We do try to get them a week in advance. We'll try to get a staff report out by the end of the week. As I mentioned, as we drive home, we'll start putting together some of the proposals we heard.
So thank you very much.
Perfect, thank you. And so based on today's conversation, happy to work on a memo with you. Councilmember Francis.
Time to make a motion.
I don't think we need a motion.
Not a motion to create the ad hoc.
Oh, for the ad hoc, good point. Thank you so much. Feel free.
Yeah, I'd like to move to create an ad hoc of the mayor and of Councilmember Marks to put together a letter for the meeting on Monday.
Great, I'll second that. Councilmember Schwarzman, sorry.
I just want to thank you, Jan, for Councilmember Marks, for representing us all this time and taking diligent notes, and to the city manager for, calling this to our attention so that we could have an open discussion about this. And thank you, Mayor, for working on the letter with Councilmember Marks.
Absolutely, thank you. Can we have roll call?
Is that a second?
I did.
Oh, okay.
Councilmember Francis?
Yes.
Mayor Stewart?
Yes.
Councilmember Marks?
Yes.
Councilmember Schwarzman?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Peace?
Yes.
The motion passes 5-0. We'll put together the ad hoc committee and put together the letter after we receive the staff report on Friday, and hopefully prepare you as much as we can, Councilmember Marks, and for Monday's meeting. Thank you very much for this meeting. Thank you so much, 3CE staff, for coming. We greatly appreciate your time and your travel. This was incredibly important to a lot of people in our community, that we have some additional transparency and communication. So thank you. Thank you very much. All right, and with that, we will adjourn this part of the meeting. We'll move forward to our closed session in about 5 minutes. I'll go ahead and open up the public comment right now for our closed session, and then we'll move over to the other room for our closed session. Do you have public comment?
Are we going to be in the other room?
No, we do not.
Okay, great.
And just for the record, so we have the announcement, the closed session is as noted on the agenda related to public employee discipline or dismissal. And anyone's available to comment on that prior to the council going into closed session. The council will be advised by alternate counsel because I was involved in the underlying process. So they have their own independent legal counsel to advise. Neither the city manager nor I will join them in that session.
Thank you for that clarification as well. Wonderful. We'll adjourn this part of the meeting and see you in all in about 5 minutes.